In this fourth and final section, we're going to discuss components associated with assessing attitude change. Now, as we've seen, our attitudes are constantly evolving. Social psychologists are deeply interested in understanding this process of attitude change, and we use experimental research to investigate the factors that drive it. So, by conducting experiments, we can manipulate different variables and measure their impact on attitudes. And this allows us to identify the key elements that make persuasion more or less effective. And just like research to measure attitudes, attitude change research is concerned with studying how and why a change occurred. Therefore, researchers measure the effectiveness of things like persuasion manipulations that aim to influence individuals' attitudes. Following the persuasion attempt, participants' attitudes are then assessed by a post persuasion attitude measurement. And this measurement is subsequently compared to a comparison attitude measurement that provides a benchmark for participants' attitudes. But where do we get that information from? Well, we use experimental research designs to investigate the different aspects of attitude change, and there are three main types. The pretest post-test design involves measuring participants' attitudes before and after a persuasion manipulation. The pretest acts as the baseline measure of the attitude before any change occurs, and by comparing the pretest to the post-test measure, we can determine the extent of change that occurred. In post-test only group design, participants are randomly assigned to either an experimental or control group, and only the experimental group undergoes the persuasion manipulation, while the control group does not. And so the control group's attitudes serve as a comparison for the experimental group's attitudes. And then the pretest post-test group designs combine elements of both the pretest post-test only and the group design. So participants are randomly assigned to a group and all groups receive both the pretest and post-test attitude measure. Each group serves as the comparison for the other group, and the pretest measurement serves as a comparison for each group's own attitude. And in addition, researchers can proactively onboard various approaches that comprehensively address the subject matter and essentially enhance the reliability of the results. For instance, in 1993, Egley and Scheiken employed a pre-test post-test group design to assess the effectiveness of a persuasion message on attitude change. The team designed the study to assess the effects of persuasion on prejudice. The researchers randomly assigned participants to either an experimental group or a control group. The experimental group was exposed to a persuasion message designed to reduce prejudice, while the control group was not exposed to any sort of persuasion message. And before and after the persuasion message, all participants were given a questionnaire to measure their attitudes towards the target group. And so the results showed that the experimental group's prejudice reducing message attitudes towards the target group became more positive after they received the persuasion message, while the control groups that didn't get any message, their attitude did not change at all. It's also important to note that while these designs provide useful insights, it's mildly important to recognize their limitations. Furthermore, though these designs are fairly common, researchers should choose the appropriate design based on their research question and study goals. All in all, attitude change research is important because it can help us to understand how to persuade people to change their attitudes. And comparison measurements are essential in attitude change research because they provide a point of reference to evaluate the impact of persuasion attempts. Pretest measures serve as the baseline, allowing researchers to see how much attitudes have shifted, and control groups offer a comparison point to determine if the persuasion manipulation had any effect compared to the group that wasn't exposed to it. And as we've explored in this lecture, attitudes are fundamental to our human experience. They shape our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, thus influencing how we perceive the world and therefore how we interact with it. But attitudes are not static. Of course, they can be molded and changed through persuasion. And we learned that persuasion is a complex process with its effectiveness hinging on factors like the source of the message itself, and the audience. The concepts we've discussed today extend far beyond the classroom. They're at play in every aspect of our lives. Advertisers, politicians, and social activists alike use persuasion to try to change our attitudes towards products, services, candidates, policies, social issues, and so on. Understanding the dynamics of attitudes and persuasion empowers us to become more conscious consumers of information, more critical thinkers, and more effective communicators. It also equips us to promote positive social change, whether it's reducing prejudice, advocating for environmental protection, or championing any cause that resonates with our values. Advertisers use persuasion to try to change our attitudes towards products and services, where politicians use persuasion to try to change our attitudes towards candidates, and social activists use persuasion to try to change our attitudes towards social issues. And so, as we conclude this chapter, I want to leave you with a powerful reminder of the pervasive nature of persuasion as it affects our lives. Richard Perloff eloquently captures this in his definition of persuasion as a symbolic process in which communicators try to convince other people to change their attitudes or behaviors regarding an issue through the transmission of a message in an atmosphere of free choice. And this quote encapsulates the essence of persuasion as an ongoing process of influence that shapes our attitudes, beliefs, and actions. It also highlights the importance of ethical persuasion, respecting individual autonomy and freedom of choice. So, by understanding the dynamics of persuasion and reflecting on our own attitudes, we can become more discerning consumers of information, more effective communicators, and more responsible citizens. And the research on attitudes and persuasion can help us to understand how to persuade people to change their attitudes. And of course, this can promote positive social change. So, in this fourth section, we explored how social psychologists study attitude change through research. We learned that attitude change research aims to understand how and why our attitudes shift, with the goal of identifying the factors that make persuasion more or less effective. To conduct this research, social psychologists use experimental methods, which involve manipulating certain variables and measuring their impact on attitudes. We also discussed the three essential components of attitude change studies: the persuasion manipulation, the post persuasion attitude measurement, and the comparison attitude measurement. Finally, we examined different experimental designs used in this field, including pre-test post-test design, post-test only, and pre-test post-test group designs. And of course, by understanding these research methods, we can gain a better appreciation for the scientific rigor behind our knowledge of attitudes and persuasion. And of course, overall, as we wrap up the chapter, we've explored the makings of attitudes and persuasion. We've learned that attitudes are learned predispositions that shape our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. They are, of course, formed through various experiences and serve different functions, from expressing our values to protecting our self esteem. Attitudes can change over time, influenced by persuasion, direct experience, social influence, and media exposure. And persuasion itself is a complex process with its effectiveness depending on factors related to the source, the audience, and the message. We've examined the research methods used to study attitude change, including experimental research design and various measurement techniques. And so, by understanding these dynamics, we gain valuable insights into how we form opinions, how we're influenced by others, and how we can use persuasion ethically and effectively to promote positive change. As always, feel free to discuss in the comments below. First question is, how can the elaboration likelihood model be used to design effective persuasive messages? What are some ethical considerations when using persuasion techniques? How can we become more critical consumers of persuasive messages in everyday life? And finally, how can the study of attitudes and persuasion be used to promote positive social change? Thank you so much for tuning in.